Number 1. Stephen Sedin. The summer air was still over Greater Manchester on July 4th, 2012, when police forced their way into a quiet, semi-detached house on Clough Avenue, Sale. Inside, they found Robert Sedin, 68, slumped dead on the living room sofa. In the hallway nearby lay his wife, Patricia Sedin, 65. Both had been shot at close range with a sawn-off shotgun. Nothing had been stolen, and the house showed no sign of struggle or forced entry. The front door was locked from the inside. At first glance, it looked like a double murder by someone they trusted. It was. The person who killed them was their son, Stephen Sedin, a man they had helped, forgiven, and, in the end, let into their home one final time. Robert and Patricia were the kind of couple who lived modestly and helped others. They doted on their children and grandchildren and, despite financial comfort, remained humble. Their savings and life insurance were worth around £230,000, and they had named Stephen as sole beneficiary. To them, that was love, a way to secure their son's future. To Stephen, it became motive. Just 4 months earlier, he had already tried to kill them. On March 20th, 2012, he rented a car and invited his parents and teenage nephew on what he said was a family outing. Instead, he drove the car into the Bridgewater Canal with his passengers strapped in. Witnesses saw him climb free through the driver's window and shout for help while the car sank. He was hailed a hero. Newspapers even called him the miracle son, who had risked his life to save his parents. But investigators later determined the steering had been deliberately locked, and he had ensured the rear doors couldn't be opened from inside. When that plan failed, he waited. By July, his debts were mounting, and the insurance money looked like his only escape. He bought a shotgun, sawed off the barrel, and traveled to his parents' home under the guise of a visit. Once inside, he shot his father as he sat on the couch, then turned the weapon on his mother in the hallway. Before leaving, he staged the scene to resemble a murder-suicide, placing the gun near his father's body and locking the front door from the inside. He tossed the key into a drain outside and called relatives, pretending to be worried after not hearing from Mom and Dad. When police arrived, the setup began to crumble. The gun had no fingerprints from Robert, and powder residue patterns proved he couldn't have fired it. Ballistics matched the weapon to one Stephen had obtained illegally. Investigators also discovered financial searches and online inquiries about inheritance and insurance policies in the weeks leading up to the killings. In March 2013, after a 5-week trial at Manchester Crown Court, Stephen Sedin was found guilty of 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder from the canal incident. The judge called the crimes brutal and grotesque acts of betrayal. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 40 years before he can be considered for parole. In court, prosecutors described him as a man driven entirely by greed, who thought he could outsmart everyone. Even as the verdict was read, Stephen shouted that he was innocent, refusing to accept what the evidence made clear. Robert and Patricia Sedin were loving parents who opened their door to their son one last time, unaware that the man they raised had come to end their lives. Their story is one of trust turned into tragedy, a quiet home, a staged scene, and a legacy destroyed for money that, in the end, Stephen Sedin would never touch. Number 2. Andrew Wamsley. Ricky Lee Wamsley and his wife, Judith Suzanne Wamsley, were known for their steady, hard-working lives. They lived in Mansfield, Texas, just outside Fort Worth. Rick worked in trucking management, and Susie worked in health insurance administration. Their priorities were simple: family, stability, and planning for the future. They saved carefully. They carried life insurance. They owned a comfortable home. Their finances, built slowly over years, were meant to protect their family long-term. They had 2 children, and like many parents, they continued to support their youngest, 19-year-old Andrew. He still lived at home, and they hoped time and guidance would help him grow into independence. They believed they were helping him build a foundation. But outside their awareness, Andrew's life had shifted. He had become deeply attached to his girlfriend, Chelsea Richardson, also 19. Their relationship was intense and isolating. Chelsea resented Rick and Susie. She disliked the rules in the house and the control she felt they had over Andrew's life. And there was something else both of them knew. If Rick and Susie were gone, Andrew would inherit the family's insurance and assets, approximately $1,650,000. What the Wamsleys viewed as a protective safety net became, to Andrew and Chelsea, an opportunity. The conversations between them turned toward a plan. They brought in a close friend, Susana Toledano, also 19, who agreed to take part. The group also involved Hilario Cardenas Jr., who prosecutors later described as someone who supplied assistance and was present in the planning. According to Texas court records, there were multiple failed attempts to kill Rick and Susie before the final night. The plan that succeeded took place on December 11, 2003, inside the Wamsley home. This account comes directly from sworn court testimony and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. Susie Wamsley was asleep on the couch when the attack began. She was shot in the head and died immediately. Rick Wamsley moved to protect his wife. He was shot in the right temple during the struggle. A fight followed. The gun fell. Andrew tried to pull his father away as Chelsea Richardson fired another shot into Rick's back. Rick, wounded but still conscious, attempted to defend himself. When Chelsea tried to stab him, Rick raised his hand and blocked the blade. Then Susana Toledano stabbed Rick in the back while he was on the floor. Rick died there, in the home he had built for his family. The next day, the scene showed clearly that the attack had come from people close to the family. Investigators followed the evidence quickly. When confronted by detectives, Toledano confessed, explaining the planning, the motive, and everyone's role. She accepted a plea deal and received life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years in exchange for her testimony. The remaining 3 were tried. In 2005, a Tarrant County jury found Chelsea Richardson guilty of capital murder. She was sentenced to death, making her the first woman in Tarrant County to receive a death sentence. Her sentence was later commuted to life in prison, without parole. In 2006, Andrew Wamsley was convicted of capital murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. Hilario Cardenas Jr. pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit capital murder and was sentenced to 50 years. Rick and Susie Wamsley did everything they could to provide security and opportunity for their family. The future they spent decades building became the motive used against them. They were not taken by strangers. They were taken by the son they trusted, the girl he loved, and the friends who chose money over the people who had built the home they stood in. Their story remains one of the clearest examples of how entitlement, resentment, and greed can hollow out a family from within. Number 3. Jason Hawkmeister. He lived in the same house as his mother, a grown man in his 30s, quiet, isolated, and financially dependent on her. Jason Hawkmeister did not have steady employment, and much of his day took place inside the walls of their home on Southwest Bell Avenue in Topeka, Kansas. His mother, Sheila Hawkmeister, was 58 years old. She was the source of stability, working, paying bills, maintaining the household, and supporting her son as she always had. To neighbors, nothing appeared noticeably wrong. The house looked ordinary. The life inside seemed still. But beneath that routine lived a motive tied to money, reliance, and what prosecutors would later argue was an opportunity. On September 10, 2011, police responded to the home after a call for help. Inside the bedroom, they found Sheila. She had been killed. The medical findings showed strangulation and stabbing as the cause of death. The home showed no signs of forced entry. Nothing suggested a stranger had broken in. The person responsible had been inside already. The house remained undisturbed in the way a familiar hand leaves no trace. As detectives began their work, one detail emerged quickly. Jason was listed as a beneficiary on Sheila's life insurance policy. In testimony and reporting surrounding the case, figures of $125,000 and $250,000 appear. Reports differ on the exact insured amount, but the presence of a policy and Jason's beneficiary status were confirmed in the state's filings and referenced during the trial. The prosecution argued that financial gain was not only possible, but central. The investigation continued over the next months. Evidence was collected, interviews conducted, and the narrative of motive formed piece by piece. Sheila had supported her son financially for years. She was his stability, his safety net, and the person who carried the weight of the home. The state argued that, rather than seek independence, Jason saw an inheritance, a direct path to the money he stood to gain if Sheila was gone. In 2015, after a full jury trial in Shawnee County District Court, Jason W. Hawkmeister was found guilty of premeditated first-degree murder. The evidence, the financial foundation of the motive, and the circumstances of the crime persuaded the jury beyond a reasonable doubt. The court imposed a sentence known in Kansas as a hard 50, life imprisonment with no possibility of parole for 50 years. The defense appealed, raising questions about trial statements and evidence. But on June 5, 2020, the Kansas Supreme Court affirmed the conviction and the hard 50 sentence, concluding that any issues raised on appeal did not change the outcome. The home on Southwest Bell Avenue no longer reflects what it once did. The quiet routines, the ordinary days, the relationship between a mother and her son, all of it ended inside that house. The financial motive, tied directly to life insurance and long-term support, is what the jury accepted as the reason behind Sheila's death. There is no restoration where this story ends. The sentence stands. The loss remains. A mother who spent her life supporting her child, and a child who chose the path that took her life away. Number 4. Dana Ewell. To his friends at Santa Clara University, Dana Ewell looked like the model student, charming, confident, and quick to talk about success. He wore expensive suits, rented planes for fun, and drove fast cars. But behind the image was a young man consumed by one thing: money. By 21, Dana was already pretending to be a self-made millionaire, though every dollar came from his parents. He wanted more, and he wasn't willing to wait. His father, Dale Ewell, was a respected Fresno businessman who had built a small aviation empire from the ground up. His mother, Glee Ewell, managed the books and kept the family close. Their daughter, Tiffany, was just 24, kind, studious, and home visiting for Easter Sunday in 1992. That afternoon, someone entered their quiet home on Hilltop Crescent and waited. When the family returned, they were ambushed and shot with a silenced 9mm weapon. Glee was hit 4 times, Dale once, and Tiffany once. The house was staged to look like a burglary, but detectives noticed valuables untouched and bullet casings missing, signs of a calculated execution. At first, Dana played the grieving son. He told reporters he was devastated, and he quickly began managing what was left of the family estate. But investigators soon discovered a pattern of lies. He had bragged to classmates that he would one day be rich, and within weeks of the killings, he began asking about his inheritance. Financial records showed that Dana stood to receive over $300,000 in immediate life insurance benefits, free of trust restrictions, plus access to a $7 to $8 million estate later in life, half at age 30, the rest at 35. Detectives realized money wasn't just part of the motive, it was the entire blueprint. Tracing calls and bank withdrawals led police to Dana's former classmate, Joel Radovcich, who had suddenly started spending large sums of cash and collecting weapons. Radovcich's roommate, Jacob Retzer, eventually cooperated with authorities and revealed that the two men had plotted the murders together. Dana provided funding and surveillance information. Joel supplied the gun and carried out the attack, while Dana ensured he had an alibi hundreds of miles away. After nearly 3 years of investigation, both men were arrested on March 2, 1995. Their trial, which lasted 8 months, exposed an elaborate plan built entirely around greed, no rage, no impulse, just strategy. In July 1998, a Fresno County jury found Dana Ewell and Joel Radovcich guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder, with special circumstances of financial gain, multiple victims, and lying in wait. Each was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Today, Dana Ewell remains behind bars, a man who once pretended to be everything his father had achieved, yet destroyed it all for an inheritance he never lived to spend. The Ewell family home still stands, but inside those walls, Easter Sunday will always echo as the day greed consumed love and ambition turned to murder. Number 5. Menendez brothers. Jose and Kitty Menendez were the kind of couple who, from the outside, seemed to have it all. He was 45, a Cuban-born executive who worked his way from nothing to become a successful entertainment executive in Beverly Hills. She was 47, a devoted mother who had once dreamed of being an actress. Together, they built a family, a mansion, and a future most people would envy. They raised two sons, Lyle and Eric, in wealth and comfort. The boys had every advantage: private schools, tennis lessons, expensive cars, and opportunities most teenagers never imagine. But what looked like a perfect life was not as peaceful behind closed doors. Family friends recalled tension. Kitty worried about her son's direction. Jose, known for discipline and control, expected perfection. On the night of August 20th, 1989, inside their home on North Elm Drive in Beverly Hills, everything came apart. Around 11:47 p.m., police received a call from the younger son, Eric. He sounded panicked. "Someone killed my parents," he cried. When officers arrived, the scene was devastating. Both Jose and Kitty had been shot multiple times while watching television in the den. The house showed no signs of forced entry. For months, detectives searched for suspects. Theories ranged from business rivals to organized crime, but nothing fit. Then, as the investigation stretched on, small inconsistencies began to appear. The brothers' spending caught attention. Within weeks of the murders, Lyle and Eric began buying luxury cars, designer watches, and lavish vacations. They spent nearly $700,000 in the first 6 months alone. When detectives followed the money, the motive began to take shape. The brothers were the primary beneficiaries of their parents' estate, valued at around $14.5 million, which included life insurance policies estimated near $650,000. Reports differ on the exact figures, but all agreed the financial gain was enormous. In March 1990, Eric confessed during therapy to his psychologist, who later told police after a separate legal dispute. Both brothers were arrested that same year. Prosecutors argued that the murders were premeditated and motivated by greed, that they wanted the money, the freedom, and control of the estate. The defense told a different story. They said the brothers acted out of fear and trauma, claiming years of emotional abuse by their father, Jose. They described a household ruled by dominance and silence. The courtroom became a stage of competing truths, one about survival, the other about greed. The first trial in 1993 ended with hung juries, but the second trial in 1996 brought convictions. Both Lyle and Eric Menendez were found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced them to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Under California's Slayer statute, because they intentionally caused their parents' deaths, both brothers were legally barred from inheriting any of the estate or life insurance proceeds. What they had killed for, the mansion, the money, the life, was gone. Decades later, public interest in the case has never faded. Documentaries, interviews, and court filings continue to revisit the story, with renewed debate over whether the brothers' claims of abuse were true. In 2025, a California judge reduced their sentences from life without parole to 50 years to life, making them eligible for parole. After more than 3 decades behind bars, they remain incarcerated but now have a distant chance at release. Jose and Kitty Menendez had built a life through ambition and hard work. They left behind 2 sons who turned that privilege into tragedy. Whatever the motives, fear, greed, or both, the result was the same. 2 parents lost, 2 lives in prison, and a family name that became synonymous with betrayal. Number 6. Andre Zachary Rebello. To everyone watching online, Andre Zachary Rebello seemed like a man who had already made it. He posted photos of luxury cars, expensive watches, and vacations beside his girlfriend, influencer Gracie Piscopo. They were the picture of young success, beautiful, confident, and untouchable. But behind the filters and the captions was a very different story: mounting debt, business failures, and a quiet desperation to keep the illusion alive. His mother, Colleen Rebello, lived only 15 minutes away in the quiet Perth suburb of Bicton. She was 58 years old, modest, hardworking, and fiercely proud of her son. Friends said she was the kind of person who would always lend help when asked. She had been doing it for years, paying bills, offering loans, and standing by him even when his cryptocurrency ventures collapsed. She believed he just needed another chance to turn things around. In early May 2020, Andre made a choice that turned that faith into tragedy. He began taking out multiple life insurance policies in his mother's name. Each one listed him as the sole beneficiary. According to investigators, the combined payouts totaled more than 1 million Australian dollars. Reports differ on the exact figure, with amounts ranging from 1.15 million to 1.5 million. He filled out the forms, forged her signature, and submitted them within days of each other. Then, less than a week later, Colleen Rebello was dead. On a mild May morning, police and paramedics were called to her Bicton home. They found her lying in the bathroom. The shower was still running, and steam clung to the tiles. There were no visible injuries, no sign of a struggle. It looked like an accident. Perhaps she had fainted or slipped. The initial autopsy listed the cause of death as undetermined. There was nothing, yet, to suggest a crime, but small details began to unravel the story. Detectives noticed that 5 separate life insurance policies had been filed only days before her death, all in Andre's handwriting, all naming him as beneficiary. When they compared Colleen's genuine signature to the ones on the insurance forms, the difference was obvious. He had forged them all. Soon after her death, Andre began submitting claims for payout, attaching the same false documents and claiming his mother had struggled with mental health issues to make the death appear natural or self-inflicted. As police looked closer, they found no record of any such illness, only Andre's financial records showing debt, cryptocurrency losses, and unpaid loans. The entire motive began to take shape. A son drowning in financial failure who saw his mother's insurance as the lifeline that could save him. When forensic experts re-examined the evidence, they confirmed what the autopsy could not, that the scene had been staged. There was no water overflow, no injuries consistent with a fall, and the shower had been turned on after she was already dead. The prosecution later told the court that Andre had used personal violence to cause her death, though reports differ on the exact method and the precise mechanism could not be determined. The court accepted that Colleen did not die by accident or natural causes. She had been killed intentionally, and the bathroom scene was arranged to conceal it. 2 years later, Andre Rebello was charged with murder and insurance fraud. At trial, the prosecution called it a crime driven by greed, deliberate, methodical, and heartless. They showed the jury the timeline, the forged policies, the forged signatures, the immediate insurance claims, and the fabricated story about her mental health. The defense insisted there was no direct proof of how she died, arguing that the evidence was only circumstantial. But the jury saw the pattern for what it was, a plan that began with a pen, a signature, and a motive worth over $1 million. In April 2025, the Supreme Court of Western Australia found Andre Zachary Rebello guilty of murdering his mother, Colleen Rebello. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years before he can apply for parole. The judge described the act as a deliberate and selfish betrayal of the woman who gave you everything. Andre has since filed an appeal, but as of September 2025, his conviction still stands. Colleen Rebello's death left her community shaken. She had raised one son, given him her trust, and became the victim of that trust. The insurance money that inspired the crime was never paid. Her quiet home in Bicton now stands as a reminder that behind appearances, behind social media perfection, there can exist motives darker than anyone imagines. She was a mother who wanted to believe in her son's success. He was a man who decided that belief wasn't enough. In the end, all that remained was the truth, a sentence, and a silence that no amount of money could ever fill. Number 7. Gabrielle Houston. It was a cold night in Flint, Michigan, December 20th, 1991. Inside a modest single-story home on Winthrop Avenue, the television still glowed when the sound of gunfire shattered the quiet. Neighbors later told police they thought it was fireworks, a couple of sharp cracks, then silence. When officers arrived, they found 46-year-old Ida Houston lying inside her own house, unresponsive. She had been shot multiple times, and the front door showed no signs of forced entry. Nothing appeared stolen. At first, it looked like another senseless killing in a city that had already seen too many. But detectives soon realized this case was different because whoever killed Ida Houston had known exactly what they were doing. Ida Houston was a lifelong Flint resident, a mother, a grandmother, and, by all accounts, a woman who worked hard and trusted deeply. She'd raised her daughter, Gabrielle Houston, mostly on her own. Ida had recently taken out a life insurance policy, naming Gabrielle as the beneficiary, a common-sense decision meant to give her child security if anything ever happened to her. No one could have imagined that same policy would become the reason for her death. The investigation in 1991 went nowhere. Police interviewed relatives and neighbors, but leads dried up. There were no witnesses, no fingerprints, and no clear motive. Over time, the file was boxed, labeled, and stored away with hundreds of other unsolved murders in Genesee County. For more than 2 decades, Ida Houston's case was cold. Then, in 2017, new detectives reopened the file. Advances in record systems and a few quiet tips led investigators back to people who had once been dismissed as witnesses. Among them was Gabrielle Houston, now 47 years old, and her longtime boyfriend, Kareem Grant. When questioned, details didn't add up. Phone records and statements contradicted each other, and when prosecutors revisited financial archives, they discovered something chilling. Gabrielle Houston had been the sole beneficiary of her mother's life insurance policy, taken out shortly before Ida's death. Detectives also located a man named Khalifa Boyd, a one-time acquaintance of the couple. In 2018, Boyd came forward and admitted he was the one who pulled the trigger, claiming he had been paid as part of a plan to make the killing look like a robbery. According to court documents, Boyd told prosecutors the idea had come from Gabrielle and Kareem, who had promised him a cut of the insurance money once the claim was processed. His testimony reopened everything the police had suspected, but could never prove. In August 2017, Gabrielle Houston and Kareem Grant were formally charged with first-degree premeditated murder, armed robbery, and felony firearm offenses. Prosecutors said the motive was simple: greed, and the chance to cash in on Ida's insurance policy. Court records show that the plan involved staging the murder to look like a break-in, then filing the claim later. Reports differ on the exact amount of the policy, but investigators confirmed it existed and that Gabrielle stood to benefit. The case moved slowly through the courts. More than 30 years after Ida's death, in February 2023, Kareem Grant accepted a plea deal, pleading no contest to manslaughter. The first-degree murder and robbery charges were dropped. Prosecutors said the plea finally brought an end to one of Flint's oldest unresolved homicide cases. As for Gabrielle Houston, proceedings continued. Reports differ on the final outcome of her case, and no public record of a conviction for first-degree murder appears in available sources. For Ida Houston's surviving family, the plea closed a chapter that had been open for more than 3 decades. She had been gone since 1991, her life cut short in the very place she should have felt safest. The discovery that her death was planned, not random, only deepened the pain. It was a reminder that sometimes justice moves slowly, but it still moves. Ida Houston's story is one of quiet betrayal. A mother's trust turned against her for a life insurance policy meant to protect the family she loved. In the end, what began as a cold case became a cautionary tale, that even after 30 years, truth can still find its way to the surface, and the walls of silence that protect the guilty can finally break. Number 8. Jennifer Pan. She seemed like a young woman whose problems had nothing to do with murder. Jennifer Pan, 29 at the time of her conviction, lived in a comfortable home in Markham, Ontario, and appeared to have the kind of life her parents had always wanted for her: college, career, success. To neighbors, she was polite, ambitious, even charming. But behind that image was deception, forged grades, fake diplomas, and a secret relationship she knew her parents would never approve. When the lies began to collapse, she started planning something far darker. Her parents, Bich Ha Pan, age 47, and Hue Han Pan, age 54, had come to Canada from Vietnam and built a prosperous life through years of sacrifice. They expected discipline and honesty, and they believed success was proof of gratitude. For years, Jennifer pretended to live up to those expectations, telling them she had graduated from university, was working in pharmacology, and would soon marry. But none of it was true. By the fall of 2010, her double life was falling apart. When her parents discovered the lies and tried to cut off her relationship with boyfriend Daniel Chi Kwang Wong, Jennifer faced a choice: confess or remove the problem. Unfortunately, she chose the second. She contacted Daniel, who in turn found 2 other men, Lenford Roy Crawford and David Milvaginum, to stage what looked like a robbery. The deal was simple. Once her parents were dead, Jennifer would inherit their estate and collect insurance and inheritance benefits estimated at about 500,000 Canadian dollars. On the night of November 8, 2010, 3 armed men entered the Pan family home. Jennifer, who had arranged for the front door to be unlocked, played the part of the victim. Her parents were forced into the living room, bound with duct tape, and shot. Her mother, Bic Pan, was killed instantly. Her father, Han Pan, was shot in the face and survived. Jennifer, tied loosely to a banister, called 911 while the house still echoed with gunfire, insisting robbers had broken in and spared her life. At first, police believed her. But within days, the story began to unravel. There was no forced entry, no valuables taken, and cell tower data showed a pattern of text messages between Jennifer and Daniel in the hours before the shooting. Her father, recovering in hospital, told detectives that when he awoke during the attack, he saw his daughter walking freely and speaking quietly with one of the intruders. That statement turned the case upside down. Jennifer was arrested on November 22, 2010, after several interviews with investigators. She eventually admitted to arranging the crime, though she claimed she had intended to hire the men only to kill herself. The evidence, texts, calls, and financial records told a different story. In 2014, she and her 3 co-defendants went to trial. A year later, in 2015, an Ontario jury found Jennifer Pan, Daniel Wong, Lenford Crawford, and David Milvaginum guilty of first-degree murder for Bic Pan's death and attempted murder of Han Pan. Jennifer received a life sentence with no parole eligibility for 25 years, plus a concurrent life term for the attempted murder conviction. In 2023, the Ontario Court of Appeal ruled that the jury instructions at trial were legally flawed and ordered a new trial on the first-degree murder count only. Her conviction for attempted murder was upheld. The Supreme Court of Canada, in 2025, confirmed that decision. Jennifer Pan remains in custody awaiting retrial on the murder charge while serving the existing sentence for attempted murder. What began as deception became destruction. A daughter willing to sacrifice her own parents for $500,000 and the promise of freedom. Bic Pan lost her life. Han Pan lives with permanent injuries and memories he cannot escape. And Jennifer Pan, once the daughter every parent dreamed of, will spend most of her life behind bars, a reminder that greed and fear can wear the face of love. Number 9. Delan Millard. He was born into privilege, a millionaire's son, a private pilot before most kids could drive, heir to a family aviation company built on hard work and ambition. Delan Millard had money, status, and opportunity. But behind that calm exterior was arrogance and control. He liked power, power over people, over property, over life itself. By the time police arrested him in 2013, 3 people were already dead, each linked by one man's desire to dominate and destroy. The first to vanish was Laura Babcock, a 23-year-old Toronto woman who had once been close to Millard and his girlfriend. She was bright, talkative, and trusting, the kind of friend who believed the best in people. In July 2012, she stopped answering calls. Her family reported her missing. For months, there was nothing. No witnesses, no evidence, just silence. Later, police would learn that Millard and his friend Mark Smitch had killed her, burned her remains in an industrial incinerator known as the Eliminator, and erased every trace of her existence. 4 months after Laura's disappearance, another death hit closer to home. On November 29, 2012, Millard's father, Wayne Millard, was found in his Etobicoke house with a gunshot wound to the eye. It looked like suicide. The case was closed quickly, and Delan inherited the estate, the family company, Millard Air, and properties worth several $1 million. But years later, investigators discovered the gun used in the suicide was one Delan himself had purchased. Ballistics and residue proved Wayne couldn't have fired it. In 2018, a judge ruled that Delan had murdered his father to gain full control of the family wealth. Then came Tim Bosma. 32 years old, a husband and father, Tim lived in Hamilton, Ontario, and had simply listed his pickup truck for sale online. On May 6, 2013, two men came for a test drive, Millard and Smitch. Tim told his wife he'd be back soon. He never came home. A week later, detectives searching Millard's farm property near Waterloo found a massive animal cremator. Inside, forensic specialists recovered what little was left of Tim Bosma. He had been kidnapped, shot, and burned, his truck stolen, his life extinguished over a machine and a moment of greed. The arrest of Delan Millard in 2013 unraveled everything. Police pieced together texts, phone records, and financial data connecting the three murders: Laura Babcock in 2012, Wayne Millard later that year, and Tim Bosma the following spring. The pattern was unmistakable: jealousy, control, and entitlement. He had killed a friend, a father, and a stranger, each for a different reason, but with the same disregard for human life. In June 2016, Millard and Smitch were found guilty of first-degree murder in Tim Bosma's death and sentenced to life imprisonment with no parole eligibility for 25 years. In December 2017, both were convicted again of Laura Babcock's murder, receiving a second life term. And in December 2018, Delan Millard alone was found guilty of murdering his father, adding a third life sentence and pushing his total parole ineligibility until the year 2088. A later Supreme Court decision in 2022 struck down stacked parole periods for multiple murders, technically making him eligible for parole after 25 years. But few believe he'll ever leave prison. His name has become synonymous with manipulation and waste, a man born with every advantage who used it only to destroy. 3 lives ended in less than 2 years: Laura Babcock, Wayne Millard, and Tim Bosma. A daughter, a father, and a husband, each taken by the same hands. Their families still carry the weight of what he did: a father's betrayal, a friend's disappearance, a husband stolen from his wife. Delan Millard's empire of inheritance became an empire of ash, a reminder that money and intelligence mean nothing when empathy is gone. Number 10. Joel Michael Guy Jr. He was 28 years old, quiet, withdrawn, and almost entirely supported by his parents. To most people, Joel Michael Guy Jr. looked like a son still finding his way, someone still in school, still preparing for a future that hadn't yet formed. He lived alone in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and rarely held long-term employment. For years, his parents paid his rent, his living expenses, and his tuition. They believed they were helping him get to the next stage of life. They gave without question. But behind his silence was a plan. His parents, Joel Michael Guy Sr., 61 years old, and Lisa Guy, 55 years old, were preparing to retire. They had worked for decades, he as an engineering designer, she in accounts payable for a medical company. Retirement meant downsizing, relocating to Surgeonsville, Tennessee, and finally enjoying a life built from hard work and routine sacrifice. And part of that decision meant something else. They intended to stop supporting their adult son financially. Lisa had quietly mentioned this change to family members in the weeks before Thanksgiving, in late 2016. That information did not leave her household, but it did not go unnoticed inside it. The family gathered at the Guy home on Golden View Lane in Knoxville for Thanksgiving. Their children visited, sat around the same table they had known for years, and shared the familiar warmth of a holiday meal. For the others, it was a simple holiday. For their youngest son, prosecutors would later argue, it was the final stage of preparation. In the weeks leading up to the visit, he purchased materials from stores in Louisiana and Tennessee. Receipts and surveillance footage would later show chemicals, large containers, and supplies with no explanation except intent. He also carried with him a notebook. Inside that notebook were handwritten notes referencing a life insurance policy on Lisa Guy of approximately $500,000, as well as lists of expected financial benefits and lines describing how to remove his parents from the equation entirely. Each step had been organized in advance. During the Thanksgiving weekend, inside the family home, both Joel Michael Guy Sr. and Lisa Guy lost their lives. When neither parent appeared at work the following Monday, and when Lisa failed to return calls, a coworker requested a welfare check. Officers arrived on November 28, 2016. Upon entering the home, they found groceries still sitting in the foyer, as if someone had just set them down and walked away. The warm air inside the house and the silence told investigators the situation was not simply a missed day at work. As they moved through the rooms, they found evidence of planning and an attempt to conceal what had taken place. Knox County investigators later stated that the scene was among the most calculated and disturbing they had encountered. Not chaotic, but methodical. By that time, Joel Michael Guy Jr. had already left Tennessee. He had driven back to his apartment in Baton Rouge, but law enforcement had identified him quickly, based on evidence left behind, including the notebook. The Federal Bureau of Investigation located and arrested him on November 29, 2016, in the parking lot of his apartment complex. According to agents, he appeared to be preparing to leave again. The case went to trial in September of 2020 in Knox County. Prosecutors presented the notebook, the receipts, the recorded purchases, and the testimony regarding the parents' plan to end financial support. The motive, they argued, was money, continued support, and the expected payout of his mother's life insurance policy. The jury deliberated and found him guilty of 2 counts of premeditated first-degree murder, along with associated felony murder and abuse of a corpse convictions. The court sentenced him to 2 life sentences, plus additional years. Years later, in August of 2024, the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit ruled that he was not eligible to receive any portion of his mother's insurance funds. Under Tennessee's Slayer statute and long-standing federal common law, a person cannot benefit financially from the death of someone whose life they caused. The ruling made it final. Joel Michael Guy Sr. and Lisa Guy were preparing for a peaceful retirement. They had worked, saved, and supported their children with all they had. Their home should have been the safest place they knew. Instead, the betrayal came from the person they welcomed in, cared for, and believed they were helping. They had opened their doors to their son for the holiday. They did not know that he had already decided it would be the last one they would share together. Which of these cases stunned you the most? It's wild how greed and lies can twist families and turn love into something dangerous. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, take care and stay safe.